Ethan Carter figured out how to beat the lottery at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right after Jake Simmons made him eat a urinal cake. The pattern was so obvious he couldn't believe no one else had seen it. The gas station bathroom reeked of piss and industrial cleaner. Ethan spat out chunks of blue chemical cake, his mouth burning with the taste of humiliation. He looked like what he was, a 22-year-old factory rat who'd just been force-fed toilet chemicals by his coworker. Fuck this. He cupped sink water into his mouth. It tasted like rust and bleach, but still better than cake. He bought a Coke to kill the taste and grabbed a scratch-off ticket out of habit. $5 winner. Nothing special, but it paid for the Coke. On the way to his beat-up Honda, the gas station billboard glitched, cycling too fast. Jackpot. $847,000. The numbers stuttered, then froze. Something about the way they lined up scratched at the back of his brain. Back in his apartment, he couldn't shake it. Ethan spread 3 months of Pick 3 and Pick 4 results across his kitchen table like blueprints. His pattern brain kicked in the same obsessive wiring that caught machine defects at work before they broke. The winning numbers weren't random. They were pseudo-random, generated by a computer algorithm that used predictable seed data. Every drawing at 11:47 p.m. used a timestamp seed. Every drawing during rain used barometric pressure. The randomization pulled from external data sources that followed mathematical patterns. Holy shit, grabbing a calculator. The next Pick 3 drawing was tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Clear skies predicted. Drawing number 1,847 inches, the sequence. If his theory was right, the algorithm would seed from the drawing number itself. He ran the calculation. 1,847 mod. 1,000 equals 847. Split into 3 digits. 847. Ethan bought the ticket online. 847, straight play, $2. If he was wrong, he'd lost $2. If he was right, he'd just cracked a multi-million-dollar code. The Pick 3 numbers came up exactly as Ethan predicted, 847. He won $250 and nearly threw up from excitement. "This is real," he whispered, staring at his phone screen in the factory break room. Around him, co-workers bitched about overtime and argued about sports scores. None of them had any idea that the skinny kid in the corner had just cracked the state lottery's algorithm. Jake walked by carrying a coffee, deliberately shoulder-checking Ethan's table. "What you looking at, calculator boy? Porn?" Lottery results. Ethan didn't look up. For the first time in years, Jake's bullying felt small, temporary. "Course you are, fucking loser." Jake kept walking. Ethan almost smiled. He pulled up the Pick 4 results and started calculating. Drawing 2,156, scheduled for 7:30 p.m. during partly cloudy conditions. The algorithm would seed from atmospheric pressure data, 30.15 inches of mercury, converted to integer format. His fingers moved across his phone, 3015. He bought the ticket for 50 cents, straight play. "Taking another smoke break, Carter?" Ethan looked up. Supervisor Williams stood there with his arms crossed, gut hanging over his belt like a badge of authority. "Just finishing lunch, sir." "Lunch ended 10 minutes ago. Line's been down because you're not at your station." The old Ethan would have apologized, scrambled back to work, let Williams write him up for being 2 minutes late. But the new Ethan, the one who could see through the lottery's lies, just nodded. "Be right there." Williams waited for the usual groveling. When it didn't come, his face reddened. "Don't test me, boy." Ethan stood up, pocketed his phone. "Wouldn't dream of it, sir." As he walked back to his station, Ethan did the math. 40 hours a week at $11.50 an hour, $460 weekly gross. After taxes, rent, food, and his piece of shit car payment, he cleared maybe $150. Tonight, if his algorithm held, he'd win $2,500 on a 50-cent bet. The factory line roared back to life, but for the first time since he'd started this job, Ethan wasn't thinking about the monotony. He was thinking about mathematics, about patterns hidden in plain sight, about revenge. The $2,500 win hit Ethan's bank account at 8:15 p.m. By 8:20, he was researching how to quit his job without burning bridges, but quitting felt too easy. Jake and Williams had spent years making his life hell. Maybe it was time they learned what that felt like. He didn't quit the next day, or the day after. Instead, he spent 2 weeks perfecting his system, winning small amounts across different games, Pick 3, Pick 4, scratch-offs from various retailers across 3 counties. Never the same store twice, never more than $500 at once. By the end of the month, he'd accumulated $8,400 in winnings and a foolproof understanding of Michigan's lottery pseudorandom algorithm. "You look different," Emily Parker said during break. She worked quality control, had a college degree she never talked about, and was the only person who'd ever been decent to him. More confident, I guess. Just been sleeping better. Ethan sipped his coffee, the good stuff from the machine, not the swill from the break room pot. Emily smiled. She had a nice smile. Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. It suits you. Over the next week, their coffee breaks became longer. Emily started sitting with him instead of just being polite. She told him about her math degree, how she'd ended up in quality control. He found himself actually talking back, sharing thoughts he'd kept buried. "You're wasted on the line," she said one Thursday. "You could be doing something important with that brain of yours." When Sarah from packaging started finding excuses to walk past his station, Emily's smile faltered slightly. When Lisa from the office said hello in the parking lot, Emily watched with something that looked like jealousy. "You know," Emily said Friday, fidgeting with her coffee cup, "if you ever want to grab dinner sometime." "I'd like that," Ethan said, heart hammering. "Let me take you somewhere nice." At Meridian that Friday evening, Emily looked beautiful in a blue dress. They talked for hours about books, dreams, the way she'd noticed him long before he thought she had. "You were always different," she said over dessert. "Smarter than the rest of them. I didn't think you'd noticed me." When the check came, $180 Ethan paid without looking at the total. "Ethan," she said as they walked to his car, "what's really going on? Did you win the lottery or something?" She was joking, but his blood went cold. "Just been making some good investments." Emily stepped closer in the parking lot light. "Well, I'm glad your luck is changing." When she kissed him, soft and tentative under the streetlight, Ethan felt like he was stealing something precious. The moment was built on money he'd won through deception, funded by a secret that could destroy everything. He kissed her back anyway, tasting possibility and guilt in equal measure. For the first time in his life, Ethan believed he might actually deserve good things. The next afternoon, he bought his first major lottery ticket, Michigan Mega Millions, jackpot at $12.7 million. The algorithm was more complex for the big games, but the principle was the same. Pseudo-random seeds based on external data. Drawing time, Saturday, 11 p.m. Weather forecast, clear skies, 47 degrees. Barometric pressure, 30.2. Drawing number in sequence, 4,891. He ran the calculations 3 times to be sure, then bought the ticket at a gas station 40 miles from his apartment. Numbers: the 14th of July 2022, 3148, Megaball 15. If he was right, Sunday morning he'd wake up a millionaire. If he was wrong, he'd lost $5 and learned a valuable lesson about hubris. The numbers scrolled across his phone at 11:02 p.m., the 14th of July 2022, 3148, Megaball 16. His ticket, the 14th of July 2022, 3148, Megaball 15, off by one gentle number. Fuck! Ethan hurled his phone across the room. It hit the wall but still showing those goddamn numbers. $12.7 million, gone because of one digit. He slammed his head back against the wall, hard enough to see stars. 4 numbers plus the megaball meant 10 grand. He lay staring at the ceiling until 3 a.m., working through the implications. The algorithm was real enough to hit 5 out of 6 on the first major test, but it had a small wobble somewhere. A rounding error or timing quirk that nudged the last number just out of reach. Monday morning, he called in sick. Tuesday, he drove to the regional lottery office with the ticket tucked in a manila envelope. No cameras or handshakes, just a clerk behind glass, paperwork, and a warm, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter." After taxes, around $7,000 would make its way to his account. On the drive home, he calculated what 7 grand could buy: time and breathing room, a chance to tighten the model before he attempted anything louder. He told himself he'd keep it small and quiet while he fixed the wobble. What he didn't say out loud: the hard part wouldn't be winning, it would be staying invisible. His total winnings now stood at $15,400, enough to change his daily life, not enough to change his future. He needed to refine the algorithm, but first he needed to understand why it had failed. 3 days after claiming his Mega Millions prize, Ethan walked into Danny's diner to find someone already waiting in his usual booth. The old man looked like a retired math professor, which, as it turned out, he was. Harold Winston, MIT class of '78, had taught probability theory for 37 years before retiring to Michigan to fish and watch for anomalies in the state lottery system. He'd been tracking Ethan's wins for 6 weeks, small amounts, different games, spread across multiple counties. The progression followed mathematical logic, not random chance. More importantly, Ethan had just attempted the Mega Millions with numbers that nearly perfectly matched the pseudo-random seed algorithm. "Sit down," Winston said. The Michigan State Lottery used a modified Mersenne twister algorithm with external data seeding, weather, timestamps, atmospheric pressure, drawing sequence numbers. Winston had been monitoring it for 15 years, waiting for someone smart enough to crack it. Ethan had come closer than anyone else. There'd been another young man, about 10 years ago, brilliant mathematician, same pattern recognition, won consistently for 6 months until he claimed a $2 million prize. Car accident the next day, very unfortunate. Coincidences are mathematically improbable, Winston said. He pulled out a folded paper, refined equations that accounted for detection systems and the wobble that had cost Ethan the jackpot. The math was elegant, sophisticated, far beyond what Ethan had figured out alone. Winston stood to leave. There were others watching now, not just the lottery commission, people who'd noticed Ethan's pattern and wanted a piece of it. The old professor left Ethan alone with the refined algorithm and the terrifying realization that winning the lottery was the easy part. Staying alive might be harder. Over the next 6 weeks, Ethan put Winston's warnings and instructions to the test. The refined algorithm was a masterpiece of mathematical stealth. Instead of obvious patterns, it taught Ethan how to win in ways that looked random to automated detection systems. Spread purchases across state lines, never buy from the same retailer twice in a month, vary the time between wins, mix losing tickets with winners to maintain statistical camouflage. By mid-November, Ethan had won 37 times across 4 states: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, amounts ranging from $50 to $5,000. Combined with his earlier wins, his total take reached $62,400. To any monitoring system, it looked like an incredibly lucky streak, not systematic fraud. He was leaving a gas station in Toledo with his latest winning scratch-off when Jake Simmons stepped out from behind a pickup truck. Well, calculator boy. Jake looked different outside the factory, smaller somehow, less intimidating without his crew backing him up. Heard you won some money? Must be nice. Living the dream. Just lucky, I guess. Ethan pocketed the ticket. Jake's eyes narrowed. Lucky. Right. Funny thing about luck, though. I've been asking around about you. Turns out you've been real lucky lately. Winning tickets all over the place. Ethan felt a chill. You've been following me? Didn't have to. Your landlord's a chatty guy when you buy him a few beers. Says you paid 6 months' rent in advance, cash. Says you've been getting mail from lottery offices in 4 different states. Jake stepped closer. Now, I may not be book smart like you, but I'm not stupid. Nobody gets that lucky without help. What do you want, Jake? Partnership. You teach me your system, I keep quiet about whatever scam you're running. 50-50 split on everything going forward. Ethan studied Jake's face. The bully was scared, probably drowning in debt, desperate for a way out. That made him dangerous. And if I say no? Then I start making phone calls. Lottery commission, IRS, local news. Won't matter if you're actually cheating or not. Once they start investigating, your winning streak ends either way. For the first time since cracking the algorithm, Ethan felt genuinely afraid. Not of Jake, of what Jake represented, the old world, pulling him back down. I need time to think about it. Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You got 24 hours. After that, I start dialing. As Jake's truck roared out of the parking lot, Ethan realized his biggest problem wasn't the lottery commission or mysterious watchers. It was the people who knew him before he became dangerous. Ethan spent the night wrestling with Jake's ultimatum. By morning, he'd made his decision. He'd give Jake a fake algorithm, something plausible enough to buy time while he figured out a permanent solution. At 9 a.m., a sharp knock interrupted his planning. Through the peephole, he saw a woman in a business suit holding a briefcase. She had the kind of smile that meant trouble. She identified herself as Dr. Miranda Cross from the Michigan Gaming Commission and requested a word with him. Ethan's stomach dropped, but he opened the door. Cross walked into his small apartment and immediately began cataloging everything: the mathematical notebooks scattered across his kitchen table, the lottery tickets pinned to his bulletin board, the careful organization of someone running a system. She set her briefcase down and pulled out a tablet, scrolling through data while she talked. Cross informed him he'd been having quite the lucky streak, 37 documented wins across 4 states in 6 weeks. She moved to his notebooks, flipping through pages of equations and probability calculations. Her expression never changed, but Ethan could see her photographing pages with her phone. Cross revealed that the statistical probability of his winning pattern occurring naturally was roughly 1 in 47 million. She questioned him about his work, travel patterns, and education. Each answer she cross-referenced against something on her tablet. When Ethan claimed to be a freelance consultant, she made notes that looked like fact-checking assignments. Cross commented on his sophisticated mathematical analysis and asked where he'd studied statistics. Ethan told her he was self-taught. Cross packed up her briefcase and headed for the door. She informed him they would be monitoring his future lottery activities very closely. They had systems in place, and they took fraud very seriously. After she left, Ethan sat staring at his notebooks, knowing she'd just built half her case right there in his kitchen. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Coffee, Danny's Diner, 1 hour, urgent, HW. Winston had been watching from the parking lot. He'd seen the gaming commission car, knew exactly what Cross's visit meant, and understood that Ethan's time had just run out. Winston was already waiting in their usual booth when Ethan arrived at Danny's diner. The old man looked grim, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. "They know," he said without preamble. "Cross isn't just investigating, she's building a case." "For what? Playing the lottery isn't illegal." Fraud Island. Winston pulled out a manila folder, thick with printouts and photographs. 5 to 10 years federal time if they can prove you're manipulating the system. The folder contained surveillance photos of Ethan at various gas stations, copies of his winning tickets, and what looked like a mathematical analysis of his betting patterns. Winston had been tracking the investigation, monitoring Cross's movements, preparing for this moment. "Walk away," Ethan said. "Stop playing. Keep what I have." Winston leaned forward. $62,000. Minus taxes, that's what, 45? Is that enough to change your life? Before Ethan could answer, Winston pulled out a different piece of paper, equations more complex than anything he'd shown before, involving multiple lottery systems and sophisticated detection algorithms. "The full algorithm," Winston said. "Not just pattern recognition, prediction, and manipulation across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. With this, you could win the multi-state Powerball. 200 million, minimum." Ethan stared at the equations. They'd know immediately. "Not if you do it right. One massive win, claimed through a trust, then disappear." Winston's eyes gleamed. "New identity, new life, somewhere they can't touch you." Ethan's phone buzzed. Text from Jake. "Time's up. What's it gonna be?" He showed Winston the message. The old man's expression darkened as he read it. "How much does he know?" "Enough. He's been tracking my wins, talking to people." Winston was quiet for a long moment, studying Ethan's face. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a newspaper clipping yellowed with age, 10 years old. The headline read, "Local mathematician dies in car accident." "I watched a brilliant young man die because he got caught between the commission and someone who wanted a piece of his action," Winston said. "I've regretted not helping him ever since." He pushed both the clipping and the algorithm across the table. "The next Powerball drawing is Saturday, 3 days from now. Jackpot's at $247 million. Ethan looked from the newspaper to the equations. Everything in his life had led to this moment, every humiliation, every small victory building to this choice. Winston stood up, left money for both their coffees. "If it goes wrong, you're no worse off than if Cross builds her case, or your friend follows through." He headed for the door. "But if it goes right, you'll never have to eat another urinal cake as long as you live." Ethan's phone buzzed again. "Jake, I'm done waiting. You've got 1 hour, or I make the calls." He folded the algorithm carefully and put it in his pocket. Time to go all in. Back at his apartment an hour later, he stared at Jake's final text. 1 hour, 60 minutes to either give Jake what he wanted or watch his entire world collapse. But as Ethan sat in his room, surrounded by Winston's equations and the weight of impossible choices, something clicked in his pattern recognition brain. Jake wasn't just a threat, he was an opportunity. Ethan pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not Winston's complex algorithms, but something simpler, something that would work exactly long enough to destroy Jake, completely. The beauty of a self-destructing algorithm wasn't that it failed, it was that it failed at precisely the right moment. He crafted it carefully, a pattern that would hit small wins for exactly 2 weeks, building Jake's confidence, making him bet bigger and bigger amounts. Then, when Jake was all in on the biggest bet of his life, the algorithm would lead him straight into mathematical suicide. Jake would lose everything. Not just his money, but his credibility. His desperation turning him into exactly the kind of person who'd believe in get-rich-quick schemes. Ethan's phone rang. "Jake, time's up, calculator boy. What's it gonna be?" "Meet me at Danny's diner in 20 minutes, Ethan said. "And Jake? Bring a notebook. You're going to want to write this down." 20 minutes later, Jake slid into the booth across from Ethan, eyes hungry and desperate. Up close, Ethan could see the stress lines, the cheap cologne trying to mask the smell of fear sweat. Jake was drowning, and Ethan was about to throw him an anchor disguised as a life preserver. "This better be good," Jake said. Ethan slid the notebook across the table. "It's called the Fibonacci pressure system. Every lottery drawing is influenced by atmospheric pressure, but most people don't know how to read the correlation." Jake's eyes widened as he scanned the equations. They looked sophisticated because they were. Ethan had built a real algorithm, just one designed to self-destruct at exactly the right moment. You take the barometric pressure, convert it to the Fibonacci sequence, then cross-reference with the drawing number modulo. Ethan explained the system patiently, watching Jake struggle to follow the mathematics. "This is real?" Jake asked. "Test it tonight. Pick 4 drawing at 7 to 30. The pressure's at 30.18, which gives you 3018. Jake immediately pulled out his phone and bought the ticket. They sat in silence until 7:35, when Jake's phone buzzed with the results. "Holy shit," Jake whispered. 3018. "It fucking worked." Ethan nodded calmly. 50-50 split like you said. But Jake? He leaned forward. "This system works best with bigger bets. The pressure differentials are more accurate on major drawings." Jake's eyes gleamed with greed. "How much bigger?" "The system peaks during high-pressure systems. Next Tuesday's drawing should be perfect for a major play." Ethan stood up. "But remember, this only works if you follow the math exactly. No shortcuts, no modifications." As Jake clutched the notebook like a holy relic, Ethan felt something he'd never experienced before, the cold satisfaction of setting a perfect trap. Jake had 2 weeks to hang himself, and Ethan had 2 weeks to win $247 million and disappear. "Thanks, calculator boy," Jake said, not realizing he'd just signed his own mathematical death warrant. Ethan smiled. Ethan had 72 hours before Jake's algorithm led him to financial suicide. 72 hours to execute the most audacious lottery heist in history and disappear into the shadows with $247 million. Winston's Powerball algorithm sprawled across his kitchen table like a battle plan. The equations were beautiful, elegant mathematical poetry that could predict the exact moment when chaos would align into order. Saturday's drawing, 11 p.m., $247 million jackpot. But winning was only half the equation. The other half was staying invisible. Ethan spent Wednesday researching anonymous trusts, shell corporations, and offshore banking. By Thursday, he'd created a paper trail so complex that even he needed notes to follow it. The Meridian Holdings Trust, incorporated in Delaware, owned by a Cayman Islands entity, controlled by a Swiss bank account, opened with a passport that technically didn't exist. Friday morning, he drove 4 hours to a gas station in rural Ohio, paid cash for the Powerball ticket, and fed Winston's numbers into the machine. The 14th of July 2023 3142. Powerball 18. The ticket felt like holding lightning. Emily found him at their usual coffee spot in the factory break room. She looked tired, beautiful, but tired in the way that comes from working a job that slowly kills your dreams. "You've been different this week," she said. "Distracted, like you're planning something big." Ethan studied her face. In 48 hours, he'd either be the richest man she'd never know, or he'd be in federal custody facing fraud charges. Either way, everything was about to change. "What if I told you that I'd figured out how to beat the system, not just win some money, but really beat it, change everything?" Emily's eyes narrowed. "I'd say that sounds dangerous, and probably illegal." "Probably." She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. "Would you do it anyway?" "I already have." Saturday night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, watching the Powerball drawing on his laptop. Around him, the city hummed with the ordinary lives of ordinary people who believed the system was unbeatable. The first number rolled, 7. His heart hammered against his ribs. 14. 23. 31. 42. 5 for 5, one number left. The Powerball tumbled in its chamber, a small red sphere that contained the difference between everything and nothing. 18. Perfect match, $247 million. Ethan closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of what he'd just accomplished. He'd beaten the unbeatable system. He'd won more money than most people could imagine in 10 lifetimes. And according to every database in the world, he didn't exist. The Meridian Holdings Trust had won the lottery, some faceless corporate entity that would claim the prize through lawyers, pay the taxes through accountants, and disappear into the labyrinth of international finance. Ethan Carter, factory worker, remained invisible. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Congratulations. The real game begins now. HW." Winston knew. Of course Winston knew, but that was part of the plan too. Ethan smiled in the darkness. Jake's algorithm would destroy him in 10 days. Cross was building a case against a ghost. And Emily was about to discover that the quiet guy from quality control had just become the most dangerous man she'd ever met. Monday morning hit the factory like a sledgehammer. News vans surrounded the building, reporters shoving microphones at anyone willing to talk about the mystery lottery winner who'd vanished after claiming $247 million. Except Ethan was sitting right there in the break room, sipping coffee and watching Jake pace like a caged animal. "It's him," Jake kept muttering. "Calculator boy figured it out." Jake's credibility was cracking. He'd blown through $3,000 using Ethan's fake algorithm, and desperation was eating him alive. Emily slid into the seat across from Ethan, her green eyes sharp with suspicion. "Everyone's talking about you. Jake thinks you're some lottery genius. What do you think?" Emily studied his face, searching for tells. "I think you paid that dinner check without looking." Ethan set down his coffee. So So normal people check the total. Her voice dropped. You didn't. Emily was piecing together the subtle changes she'd missed before, the way he sat straighter, the expensive watch, the confidence that radiated from him like heat. Maybe I'm not normal. She felt her pulse quicken. Maybe you're rich. Around them, the factory buzzed with gossip. Nobody was paying attention to the quiet conversation where the real truth was being revealed. What if Jake's right? Ethan asked. Emily's breath caught. Are you? I'm leaving tonight. Leaving? Forever. Emily grasped the implications. Everything clicked into place. Ethan, what did you do? He pulled out his phone and showed her the banking app. Emily's world exploded. Numbers filled the screen, more zeros than she'd ever seen in one place. She forgot how to breathe. Holy shit, wanna come? Emily started laughing, pure joy mixed with disbelief. The sound was wild and free. You magnificent crazy bastard. Is that a yes? She looked around the break room one last time. Fluorescent lights, motivational posters, soul-crushing routine stretching endlessly into mediocrity. Then back at Ethan, who was offering her escape from all of it. When do we leave? Relief flooded his features. After I finish with Jake. Emily glanced across the room where Jake was still pacing, still ranting, completely unaware his world was about to end. Ethan's smile revealed the predator hiding behind the quiet factory worker. He's about to learn what happens when you blackmail a genius. Emily squeezed his hand, feeling anticipation thrill through her. That evening, Ethan sent Winston a simple text. Danny's Diner. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. We need to talk. Winston was waiting in their usual booth at Danny's Diner. When Ethan arrived, the old professor's fingers drummed against his coffee cup, the nervous tick of a chess master who thought he'd executed the perfect endgame. Winston congratulated Ethan on his windfall, though expressed curiosity about why he remained in town instead of disappearing as planned. Ethan slid into the seat across from him and informed the professor that his plan had contained a flaw. Winston asked what flaw that might be. Ethan explained that Winston had assumed he was working for him. He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. Winston glanced at the screen and felt his world tilt. The account showed $247 million, but under his own trust name. His coffee cup slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. Winston demanded to know how this was possible. Ethan had spent weeks mapping Winston's entire network. Every shell company, every offshore account, every lottery winner the professor had trapped, all documented while the old man thought he was teaching algorithms. Winston grasped the scope of his miscalculation. His careful mentorship had been turned into surveillance. The quiet factory worker had been hunting him from the beginning. Winston protested that Ethan couldn't prove anything. Ethan pulled out a thick manila folder. Documents spilled across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Winston stared at 20 years of careful construction laid bare. Marcus Chen in Seattle, Sarah Williams in Detroit, every victim photographed, every crime cataloged, every secret exposed. Ethan outlined what would happen next. Winston would call each victim and transfer every asset to Ethan's control. Then he would become Ethan's inside man in whatever organization he truly represented. The professor felt his denials crumble before they reached his lips. Ethan owned everything. Now the network, the money, the power. The student had consumed the master. Winston asked what would happen if he refused. Ethan showed him the alternative. FBI contacts, IRS files, media outlets all ready to receive Winston's crimes with a single phone call. Winston laughed bitterly, recognizing his complete defeat. The genius he'd tried to control had outplayed him at every level. Winston acknowledged Ethan's victory and welcomed him to the big leagues, though he suspected his former student had been playing there longer than any of them realized. He informed Winston of one final task. Tomorrow night, Jake would lose everything using the fake algorithm. Winston would tell him exactly what Ethan wanted him to hear. Winston asked what message he should deliver. That Ethan Carter died in a car accident 3 days ago. Very tragic, very final. Winston accepted his new position in the hierarchy. The mentor had become the servant. An hour later, Ethan stood outside the downtown Marriott. Finding Cross had been simple. Federal agents weren't as invisible as they thought. Dr. Miranda Cross was reviewing surveillance footage in her hotel room when 3 sharp professional knocks interrupted her work. She opened the door to find Ethan Carter standing in the hallway, wearing a $3,000 suit and the kind of smile that meant someone's world was about to end. Ethan informed her they needed to talk. She reminded him he was under federal investigation, and anything he said would be used against him in court. Ethan acknowledged the warning and stepped past her into the room, settling into the chair by the window with complete relaxation. She demanded to know how he'd found her. Ethan explained it was the same pattern recognition that had led him to everything else. He pulled out a tablet and revealed that her investigation had a 73% failure rate. She protested that the information was classified. Ethan tapped the screen. Her own case files appeared: Marcus Chen, Sarah Williams, David Park, all suspected of lottery fraud, all cleared due to insufficient evidence. She stared at files that should have been impossible to access. Her breathing became shallow as she grasped the implications. She demanded to know how he'd obtained classified materials. Ethan had been monitoring more than lottery patterns. Her gambling problem, her daughter's medical bills, her 3-year relationship with Winston's organization, all mapped out like a mathematical equation. She felt her carefully constructed world crumble. The young man across from her knew everything that mattered. She accused him of lying. Ethan swiped to another screen, revealing bank transfers, medical records, casino receipts, her entire life exposed in digital detail. She discovered her secrets meant nothing now. Her daughter's leukemia treatment, the experimental therapies insurance wouldn't cover, the desperate choices that had led her here all laid bare. Ethan explained he wasn't there to judge her, but to make an offer. She understood she was trapped and asked what he wanted. Ethan outlined his requirements: close the case, declare the investigation inconclusive, file a report stating no evidence of fraud existed. She protested that she couldn't comply. Ethan revealed what he could do in return. Her daughter needed another round of treatment costing $400,000. He was transferring $500,000 to the treatment fund immediately. She felt the weight of impossible choice crushing down on her career versus her daughter's life. Ethan showed her the alternative, evidence of her relationship with Winston's network, ready to destroy her career, while her daughter died during the corruption investigation. Her phone buzzed. Banking notification. $500,000 deposited. She grasped her new reality. The quiet factory worker had just bought her daughter's life, and her silence in a single transaction. She asked who he really was. Ethan stood, straightening his suit jacket. Someone who understands that the system only works for people smart enough to beat it. Ethan headed for the door, then delivered his final message. Winston's organization was about to experience personnel changes. She might want to find new friends. After he left, she sat alone, staring at the bank notification that had just saved her daughter's life. She reached for her laptop and began typing her report. Investigation inconclusive, no evidence of fraud detected. She had learned her place in Ethan's new order. Jake's mathematical suicide was complete. Jake Simmons stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Casino at 11:47 p.m., staring at his phone screen in disbelief. The pick 4 numbers had just been announced, 9271. His ticket read 3018. Jake felt his world collapse around him. He'd followed the algorithm exactly, but for the 3rd night in a row, it had failed him completely. Jake had started the week with $8,000, his entire savings plus money borrowed against his truck. Those first few wins had made him so confident he'd bet bigger and bigger amounts. Now he was down to his last $200 and facing a horrible truth. His phone rang. The caller identified himself as Harold Winston and claimed Jake had been using one of his algorithms. Winston explained that the Fibonacci pressure system was designed to self-destruct after exactly 2 weeks, a safety feature to prevent unauthorized use. Jake grasped the scope of his betrayal. Winston told him that Ethan Carter had died in a car accident 3 days ago. Very tragic. The phone slipped from Jake's numb fingers. Jake understood his complete destruction. He'd lost everything chasing a ghost. The algorithm was fake, Ethan was dead, and Jake was broke, desperate, and utterly fucked. His phone buzzed with a text, directing him to a black Mercedes in the VIP parking area. Jake spotted the car through the casino lights. He had nothing left to lose. The Mercedes door opened as he approached, and Jake's reality shattered into fragments. Ethan Carter sat behind the wheel, very much alive, wearing a suit that cost more than Jake's truck. Ethan greeted his former tormentor with casual mockery. Jake stammered about Ethan's supposed death. Death is just another pattern to manipulate. Ethan gestured to the passenger seat. Jake slumped into the car, feeling his defeat settle over him like a burial shroud. Ethan explained that Jake owed dangerous people a lot of money: casino loans, credit cards, that second mortgage he'd taken out yesterday. Jake discovered Ethan had bought all his debts that afternoon. Ethan pulled out a tablet showing legal documents and informed Jake that he now worked for him. Jake stared at contracts, bearing his name scattered across dozens of pages. He grasped his new reality. Ethan owned his house, his truck, his credit, his life. Jake asked what kind of job he'd have. Ethan's smile revealed the predator that had been hiding behind the factory worker. He outlined Jake's new role: personal assistant, driver, security, whatever was needed. Jake felt his last shred of dignity crumble. He asked what would happen if he refused. Ethan explained the alternative: immediate debt collection, homelessness by Friday, hospitalization by Saturday. Jake understood his complete powerlessness. The factory worker was gone. In his place sat something far more dangerous. Jake asked about his first assignment. Ethan reached into the back seat and pulled out a small cooler. He directed Jake to a gas station bathroom 2 miles away where the urinal cakes needed changing. Jake felt the perfect symmetry of his destruction. The bully who had once forced Ethan to eat urinal cakes would now be changing them. Ethan explained it was a performance review to see if Jake was management material. Jake took the cooler with shaking hands, accepting his new place in the hierarchy. Yes, sir. Ethan started the engine and welcomed Jake to the team. 6 months later, Ethan Carter sat on the deck of his private island, watching the sunset paint the Caribbean sky in shades of gold and crimson.